Good day to you. You know, every day you wake up, it's just an assumption that you're going to be able to get on the internet. You're going to be able to grab your phone, you're going to be able to surf, you're going to be able to send some emails if you need to, post some photos to your social media. Or if worse comes to worse, you'll go to campus, you'll pick up the wireless at East Stroudsburg University, go to the library, use one of the computer labs. It's no problem for you to get on the internet. But that's really not the case for the entire nation. And that's what this chapter is all about. It's all about digital inequality as we take on chapter 7 in this book. And digital inequality is the study of how the internet, and more specifically to our class, social media, how it has created disadvantages for certain groups who are or are not able to access it. And so that's what this chapter is about. It takes a sociological approach, as it says. And one of the first concepts that it mentions is called the digital divide. The digital divide is this imaginary construct that separates the world between people who have access to the internet and people who don't have access to the internet. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, who doesn't have access to the internet today? Well, it's not necessarily so much about who just plain has access as it is about who has access to high-speed internet and free internet and easy internet to use, versus those who have to travel miles to get to a wireless hotspot, or those who have to use really outdated phones, or even those who may still be using dial-up modems in rural parts of the country. The idea is that if you have access to the internet, you have a lot more advantages. I mean, even a person who has grown up without any means of affording a doctor today can diagnose themselves. They can go onto WebMD or any other of the groups of people out there who are suffering from similar afflictions, such as prostate cancer, for example, or diabetes, and you can start learning a whole lot about how to treat yourself. So you don't necessarily need to have the social status today to be able to get to the best doctors, to be able to get the best advice from hospitals and medical service providers, because you can get it on the internet if you can get on the internet, if the internet is fast enough for you. And so the digital divide is more about those who have free, open, high-speed access to the internet versus those who have a hard time getting on it, it's slow for them, or they can't get it at all. Within this idea of the digital divide, there are two concepts that go together that describe what you acquire when you get onto social media these days, and one of those concepts is called social capital. And this is the idea that the internet and social media provide you with the ability to make lots of connections with people. That's something that comes in particularly handy as a graduate getting ready to make your way out into the world for the first time, because you want to have those connections. That's why we have a website like LinkedIn, which is completely dedicated to facilitating professional relationships so that you can advance your career. So if you can get onto social media, you can meet people that are going to provide internships for you, that are going to provide advice to you, they're going to provide role models to you, going to provide friendships, etc. It just opens up a whole new world of social capital, social media and the internet do. The next concept that goes along with that is cultural capital. Cultural capital is a more sophisticated term. It refers to the capital that you acquire, and capital is something that gives you a resource. That's what this word essentially means, capital. When you acquire cultural capital, you acquire the knowledge of the tastes, the practices, and the rituals of the people who are using that social medium. In other words, you're acquiring cultural knowledge, or cultural capital, as we say. We know, for example, that Facebook is not really a medium that accepts profanity. You don't see people actually saying the word, and excuse me for saying, but just to point it out in its most direct terms, you don't find people saying fuck on the internet. You may find somebody writing F-U and then asterisk, asterisk. Why is that? That's in part because the people are using Facebook, as the book points out, are mostly educated, mostly white. Not that other ethnicities don't appreciate or don't use or are not as equally against profanity as whites. But this particular culture of Facebook, not that it's completely white and educated people, but it does skew towards that compared to other platforms. That has something to do with the kinds of language that people will tolerate on Facebook. And so it's just not something you do on Facebook. On Twitter, however, it's completely different. You can put anything on Twitter, and celebrities do, people do, porn stars do. I mean, Twitter is a completely different culture compared to Facebook. And I'm assuming the same is true for Tumblr, Instagram, YouTube. YouTube has its own restrictions as far as what content is going to be considered to be obscene, in which case then you have to register to view that content, but it's still not going to be explicit content. So I'm just using the idea here of profanity to describe how there is a certain knowledge that goes along with user groups of particular social media that you gain when you gain access to those groups through social media. Speaking of social groups, the next concept is social class. I mentioned a little bit. I'm going to kind of ask you to think about this on your own. We know that more Hispanics and African Americans and Asians use Twitter than use Facebook in comparison with whites. We know, as we said, that whites use Facebook quite a bit. And so what social class is referring to is, in part, it's referring to your education, your income, your prestige, and sometimes ethnicity factors in there, although the book doesn't include it, but I do, because you find ethnicity is sometimes associated with social class. So rightly or wrongly. It's the way that it is. We know that, for example, that inner cities are vastly more populated by African Americans. We know that rural areas are more populated by white people. We know the West Coast is, and certain parts of big cities are more populated by Asians. Chinatowns is what I'm referring to. So social class refers to, are there different social classes that use different social media, and do social media help you enter a social class and maintain that position in that social class? One of the concepts that goes along with this is homophily, Homophily, homophily. This is where you affiliate with others who are like you on social media. You seek those people out. I frequently use the example in this class of rock and roll. A lot of my life revolves around rock and roll and learning about rock and roll and following rock and roll and playing rock and roll on my radio show. So I tend to have a lot of friends who have some association with music. Either they're former disc jockeys that I've known or band members, etc. You have your own groups of people who you affiliate with. You have similar interests in them. Maybe it's horseback riding. Maybe it's the outdoors. Maybe it's that you are living down the shore. There's affiliate groups or homophilies that exist online, and you are part of many of them. Now, actually, most of the people in this class, you are millennials, maybe not everybody, and you often have heard that term used to describe you, but do you know what a millennial is? A millennial is a person who's born after 1980. And actually, you are referred to in this chapter, most of you, as digital natives because you are millennials. That means that you have grown up in a digital world. There is no other world to you. From the moment that you were born, the digital world existed. Compared to somebody like myself, born in 1962, there was an analog world that I was born into. The digital world, as far as the everyday person being a part of it, didn't really come around until the late 80s. And so that means that you who are digital natives, it's just expected that you have an advantage to you by virtue of the fact that you know technology. You know how to use a phone. I tell you what, my son, he's 15. If I have a problem fetching a photo off my phone and putting it on my computer, something that should be really easy to do, it often turns into a nightmare. I can't get my computer to read the phone. I can't get the photo to transfer over. I can't find it when it does transfer over. I hand my phone to my son, and in about 60 seconds, he's got the photo for me on my computer. That's probably the case for you. And you know how to doctor a photo, and you know how to which is to say to edit it. You know how to send a photo and save a photo and flip a photo and do all kinds of things to it. It's just something that you know how to do because you are a digital native. But does that really give people an advantage? I mean, I'm noticing an increasing number of people in college who are doing away with social media. They don't like the negativity of it. They don't like the pressure to be on it every single day. They don't like the distraction of it. And frankly, they sometimes wonder the ultimate value of it. I don't have any numbers to present it. It's just more and more students I'm talking to seem to have this attitude. And if you look at the book breaks down age groups of people in terms of when their social media use is the greatest. You can decide for yourself whether this is true in terms of your own experience. But according to the book, the age of 13 to 15 is the most intense social media use today. 13 to 15. That's pre-pubescent to adolescent. So those years, 13 to 15, are where tremendous changes are going on inside of human beings with their hormones, their brain development, their emotional development, their cognitive development, which means their thinking development, and their bodies changing. And so social media use is probably a kind of way of coping with all those changes that are going on inside of yourself. And in fact, the book makes the claim that most people 13 to 15 are using social media for identity building. They're trying to build an identity that's separate from their parents, separate from their family, separate from where they grew up. That's what an identity is. It means that you're identified as being unique. So you're trying to forge your uniqueness during those years. Once you get past the age of 15, according to the book, then what you start to do with social media is to use it for social connections, to meet people. It becomes less about working on yourself and how you're presenting yourself and more about meeting others. There are other age groups described in the book as well. I invite you to grapple with those concepts and think about whether they are true in your own experience. And finally, that takes us to the final concept for today, which is the split between rural and urban America. Now, here in East Stroudsburg, where many of you live, or at least reside for part of the year when you're going to ESU, we've got a couple towns here. We've got East Stroudsburg, we've got Stroudsburg. But once you get outside of town, especially if you start driving west, you get into some really, really rural areas. That means areas where people are living far away from each other. It doesn't have to be on farmhouses. It could be in suburbs, but you can't walk to a town. And the population is not so dense that you have public services like buses and businesses on main streets, etc. So actually 25% of the nation is living in rural areas, especially when you get out west in those vast expanses in Utah and Nebraska and those other states, even parts of California. You have a lot of people where there is no internet service. And if there is, they're having to get it through their cell phone provider, and it's more expensive, and it's more spotty, and it's more costly, certainly to upload data. And so you have this divide that we started out the class with for people who live in rural areas. It's one of the reasons that most graduates from college, when they seek a job, they're trying to get to not necessarily a rural area, but certainly an area that is not, they're trying to get not necessarily to an urban area, but certainly they're trying not to move to a rural area, in part because the internet resources are not going to be able to provide them with the opportunity for advancement like you would in a big city. So that's going to wrap up this chapter about digital inequality. Think about whether you have advantages over others or disadvantages when it comes to your ability to use social media. Have a great day.